Chapter 1965. The trip to the bottom of the sea this time was completely about holding one breath in the chest. It was purely the circulation of the embryonic breathing technique. Although it was extremely tiring and everyone almost couldn't hold it in for a long period of time, it was still very beneficial to the refinement of one's cultivation. At this moment, Chu Yang even felt that the bottleneck of the celestial being level was gradually loosening, and he could break through at any time. Update P. That tyrannical and pure spiritual energy was constantly flushed out from the tribulation space, and that creation energy was released bit by bit from the meridians and flesh of his whole body. Now, as long as he calmed down and meditated once, he could enter the celestial being level with his head held high. But how could he dare to break through now? Breaking through was no different from courting death. It was too late to cover up his tracks now. Breaking through required a big commotion. Once he broke through, it was bound to cause a huge commotion. He was only at the heaven level before, but with the help of the worldly creation pill, his cultivation had improved greatly. Now, he was facing the threshold of breaking through from the saint level to the celestial being level. He had also accumulated many small levels of energy to increase his cultivation. As long as he broke through, there was no doubt that he would definitely attract all the enemies. Even before he could break through completely, the enemies would already be at the city gates. So, he could only hold it in. Even if he couldn't hold it in, he had to hold it in. Somewhere in the distance, there was a faint glimmer of light. At the same time, an undercurrent from underground was surging violently. Chu Yang frowned. This muddy river should have reached its end. The ultimate fate of this overflowing river was to merge into another river. It would become a brand new water flow, and this water flow was no longer as muddy as before. Because it had received a shock. At the end of this river, there was a different situation. Because it was a joke to talk about moving stealthily in the clear river water. As long as there were enemies passing by, they would be seen immediately. He would be seen with a single glance. At that time, he would only end up as a live target for others, to be slaughtered. At the end of the river, people also stopped. Chu Yang didn't immediately issue a new order, but his body slowly came to a stop. He stopped in the murky river water. The people behind noticed that Chu Yang stopped moving forward, and naturally, they all stopped as well. They had been running all the way until now. Everyone's admiration for this young villa master Chu had already reached the point of prostrating themselves before him. They had been unconvinced of Chu Yang in the beginning, and had questioned him when they had started to flee. However, everyone had changed their views a lot after these two changes. At least for now. Everyone began to have a certain degree of confidence that they could escape from Mo Yuntian's death pursuit, because if he was the pursuer, there was almost a 10% chance that he would have lost him. If they were still unable to escape from Mo Yuntian's grasp, then they could only resign themselves to their fate. It definitely wasn't that Villa Master Chu's plans weren't good enough. It could only be attributed to the will of the heavens playing tricks on people, not the fault of fighting. Chu Yang slowly rose to the surface of the water. When he was about 3 feet away from the surface of the water, he paused for a moment, listening to the movements outside and sensing the changes in the outside world. Then, he rose another foot and sensed the movements in his surroundings again. After confirming that there was no danger, Chu Yang's whole body suddenly rose from the water like a rag. At the moment of rising, his hair had already become completely dry. Following that, his clothes also became dry. Then, his whole body was like a snake that had just come out of the water. With a flash on the surface of the water, he quickly entered the bushes at the side. When he came out of the river, he didn't bring up a single drop of water. The moment he entered the bushes, he didn't stop at all. He silently glided along the grass for a distance of more than 100 feet. Next to him was a small forest with only a few hundred trees. In the next moment, Chu Yang had already entered that small forest. His body slowly sank, and his whole body sank into the soil. The dense spiritual energy around his body stirred and slowly expanded outwards. Gradually, a cave was expanded underground, a cave that could accommodate people. When the second person came in using his method, the space inside the cave was enough to accommodate 200 to 300 people. In less than 10 breaths of time, The 200 people had all followed Chu Yang into the cave. Everyone had a feeling of seeing the light again. The entire process of floating along the river took a full 3 hours. It was only now that they could finally breathe through their nostrils. We were lucky enough to pass the first stage safely. Chu Yang's voice was very low, but everyone listened attentively. Even those who had already thought of death and were in complete despair had now regained some vigor in their eyes. Fantasies were after all just fantasies. Once the real enemy came, no one wanted to die. If there was a chance to live, who would really want to die? Passing this stage is a victory, but it's also just the beginning. Because the next 8 stages are the real fatal ones. Now, we're just at the beginning. There are still 23,000 miles to our destination, the Great River. In these 23,000 miles, any distance of 1 foot or even 1 inch could be the difference between life and death. Chu Yang said, "So, let's rest here for a while. Let's restore our spirit and ensure that our physical strength is intact before we continue on our journey." As he spoke, he instructed everyone to take out the dry food that they had prepared beforehand and began to eat. At everyone's level of cultivation, even if they didn't eat, it wouldn't affect them too much. However, after filling their stomachs, they would have a subtle psychological feeling of with food in their stomachs, one's heart would not panic. Normally, this feeling naturally didn't matter. However, at such a special time, it would become a kind of spiritual support. A series of chewing sounds could be heard. Everyone was trying hard to restrain themselves, but the fragrance of the dry food was real and real. Even those seniors who had been fasting for decades or centuries were chewing the dry food vigorously at this moment. They had never realized that rice could be so delicious. It seemed that they hadn't eaten for hundreds of years. It was really a waste of life, eat to prove that they were still alive. As Chu Yang ate, he sketched out the next route in his mind. Going out from here was coincidentally the other side of the Forest of Guidance that he had encountered when he first arrived at the Heavenly Palace. The Forest of Guidance was a special place that could only be exited and not entered. In other words, it was a forbidden area. Because it was a forbidden area, there were very few people around. There were also relatively few places that could hide so many people. Then, how could they safely pass through this special place? This was undoubtedly a big problem. The current situation was that they absolutely couldn't allow any mistakes to happen. If they made a mistake, it would be equivalent to sending themselves to the gates of hell. There was no chance of luck, and there was no chance of a second chance. They could only succeed in one strike. Let's first divide the following teams. Chu Yang said lightly, "First, we have to divide into 5 small teams. When we escape later, although the 5 teams will move together, there must be a sequence in which they move first. In the long process of escaping, it's impossible that we will never be caught, and it's even more impossible that we won't encounter the enemy. On this point, I hope that all of you are clearly mentally prepared. Although today's journey was smooth, it was because of many external factors. In the future, such favorable conditions will no longer exist. If you want to die, you must have a mentality that disregards life and death. Everyone, do you understand?" Chu Yang's heavy voice reverberated in everyone's ears. Everyone silently nodded their heads. Once we encounter the enemy, then, the team that lags behind must be prepared to sacrifice themselves. Only your sacrifice can buy some time for the others when we encounter the enemy, and create a chance to escape. If everyone only cares about escaping, the final outcome will only be complete annihilation. This is the reality. Although I don't want to say it, I have to say it. Chu Yang closed his eyes. This order is up to all of you to decide. Those who must survive, and those who have the most value after surviving can automatically be in the first team. And so on and so forth. The 200 people looked at each other silently. Then, in this silent place, some people consciously walked to the back, and some consciously stayed in the front. At this time, there was no need for modesty, and there was no need for hypocrisy. A hierarchy was automatically formed. Those who stayed at the back were all willing, and those who stayed at the front were also willing. In unison, the front team of 50 people knelt down in front of the 150 people behind them. Then, the second team of 50 people turned around and knelt down. Then, the third team. Only the last 50 people stood tall and proud, accepting this salute, accepting everyone's salute. When the people in front stood up, the last team knelt down neatly, followed by the third team, the second team. The people in front knelt at the back because, your sacrifice may allow me to survive. So, this is a life-saving grace. A life-saving grace. I want to kneel and thank you. The people at the back knelt at the front because, I may die, and I will definitely die in front of all of you. If all of you can return alive, then, my affairs, my family, my worries, please help me, please take care of me. This scene happened silently, but it was filled with a kind of shock. In front, about 500 miles away, Meng Wuya stood with his hands behind his back with a gloomy face. Behind him, the Mo Yun Tian soldiers, whether it was the Mo Yun guards or the silver-armored soldiers, all of them didn't even dare to breathe loudly. Everyone knew that great General Meng was really angry now. Meng Wuya would never have dreamed that Chu Yang would actually lead so many people to escape so far away in one breath, and even escape from the range of his own eyes. Now, his heart was full of mixed feelings. There was admiration, and even more anger. He was indeed someone that he sincerely admired. He was indeed the person who had the guts to kill Mo Yun Tian. Chapter 1966. Only, where was Chu Yang now? Even a saint-level divine sense couldn't sense him. What method did he use to avoid it? Thinking of this, Meng Wuya's face suddenly changed. This is from P. There were actually quite a few methods that could block the divine sense of a saint-level expert. However, most of them had a precondition, which was that it had to be used by someone of the same level to avoid it. In other words, as long as you weren't a saint-level expert, or were weaker than Meng Wuya, it was basically impossible to avoid it. However, this statement wasn't absolute, because there were still a few methods that could use some mediums to avoid the divine sense of a super expert. In this mortal world, the most common mediums were water, fire, earth, and so on. As long as these things were used properly, they could weaken the divine sense of a saint-level expert to a great extent. When it came to blocking divine sense, the first thing to use was fire. Fire was the only thing that existed in the form of pure energy among the 5 elements. Strictly speaking, divine sense was actually also a kind of energy. If one used divine sense to interfere with fire, they would definitely be burned by the fire, causing damage to their divine sense. This was something that no expert could avoid. However, it was really difficult to create a protective layer made entirely of fire, and it might not be very useful. Take Chu Yang and the others as an example. If they really created a fire shield, there would be no need to use divine sense to search. They could just start fighting directly. It was really too conspicuous. It was not that one's spiritual sense was unable to sense water and earth. It was just that using one's spiritual sense to sense things that were isolated by water and earth, even if one had reached the level of a saint, would find it extremely difficult to do so. Take the infinite boundless mountain from before as an example. Although Meng Wuya's spiritual sense was undoubtedly shocking, he was only able to sense things within half a foot of the infinite boundless mountain. If it were ordinary ink cloud guards or silver-armored soldiers, divine sense wouldn't even be able to penetrate it. Of course, the main reason for this result was that the mountain's structure was far superior to ordinary mountain rocks. However, as a medium, earth was indeed the most difficult to penetrate with divine sense. If the medium was water, the situation would be relatively better. Even the ordinary ink cloud guards and silver-armored soldiers could detect movements under the water about half a foot deep. For a saint like Meng Wuya, he could detect movements at a depth of more than 3 feet. However, there were no absolutes in this world. There were a few special circumstances that were not within this restriction. One of them was the elven trait of Duke Yu. His elven attribute was wood, and he was naturally close to water and earth. His divine sense could easily penetrate everything within 1,000 feet radius. The other type was like Chu Yang. Chu Yang had the heaven-splitting divine technique. He had a large dantian and was always in the 5 elements. His body was accompanied by the changes of yin and yang, and he wandered between life and death. The weakening of the medium in the general sense was negligible to him. Furthermore, the difficulty of Chu Yang's cultivation was at least double that of an ordinary person's. But the strength that he obtained from his cultivation was also double or even more than that of an ordinary person's. His divine sense was at least several times stronger than people of the same level. Moreover, this person of the same level had to be the strongest among ordinary cultivators. The level of Chu Yang's divine sense was much, much stronger than an ordinary person's. Therefore, he could easily sense all changes outside of the 5 elements. This was something that others could only be envious of. How could Meng Wuya, who had the strength of a sage, not understand this principle? Along the way, he didn't see any smoke or dust. Moreover, due to the wrong direction, he didn't see any water flow. Now that he was at his wit's end, he changed his train of thought and instantly had a vague idea. Meng Wuya's face sank. He looked at the commander of the Mo Yun guards and asked, "Did you see a big river in the process of tracking?" "A big river?" The commander pondered for a while and said, "No big river, but there was a small river. The river water was very muddy." Meng Wuya's pupils shrank. "A muddy river water?" "Yes." "What was the direction of the river?" Meng Wuya's voice had a bit of a heavy tone. "Towards the south." The commander recalled for a while and then answered with certainty. "How long after you separated from me did you see the river?" "About less than half an incense's time." In terms of distance, it was at most 200 miles. The commander was sweating profusely from the interrogation. It was such a muddy river water. Although they saw it at that time, no one paid attention to it. If it wasn't for their super good memory, they would have forgotten it by now. But they were asked in such detail by Great General Meng. Could it be that there was a problem with the river water? Meng Wuya closed his eyes and sighed. "Half an incense's time. Sigh, when you saw the river, it is very likely that Chu Yang and the others were in the river right under your eyes." "What? How is this possible?" The commander of the Mo Yun guards was shocked. Meng Wuya shook his head speechlessly. "It's useless to say more. Let's set off immediately to find the river you mentioned. But, even if we get there now, I'm afraid Chu Yang and the others have already left." The commander was very upset. "There was once an opportunity to establish a peerless martial art in front of me, but I didn't notice it. I let it go lightly and didn't pay attention to it. If the heavens give me another chance, even if I have to roast that river dry, I will still have a harvest. Bastard. If we don't go there and take a look, how will we know where they went? Are we going to search like headless flies? Do you think the eastern royal sky belongs to your family?" Meng Wuya was furious and scolded in anger. At this point, 3,000 people turned back and returned. After a long while, Meng Wuya stood in the cave in the forest that Chu Yang had opened up. He looked up to the sky and sighed. What a genius. It's really hard to imagine how a young man in his 20s could come up with so many ingenious escape plans. Meng Wuya really didn't understand. According to the norm, a young man in his 20s would still be training hard in seclusion in the sect, and would still be receiving teachings and reprimands from the masters. But Chu Yang had already leaped out and faced Mo Yuntian head-on with his bare hand. How could he have so many life experiences? Where did he get such rich Jianghu experience? Was it really just that the younger generation would surpass them in time? Just as Meng Wuya was sighing to the sky, Chu Yang and the others who were full of energy and in good condition were running along the periphery of the forest. They were fast but silent all the way. Chu Yang's own speed wasn't very fast. But he had been maintaining this constant and uniform speed. And this frequency had driven everyone to run at the same frequency and speed. After a period of time, everyone strangely discovered that even though they had been running for such a long distance, they didn't feel tired at all by using this breathing frequency to circulate their inner breath. This was really a strange thing. Everyone's gaze changed again when they looked at Chu Yang. This guy, how many times did he have to run to be able to come up with such a complete set of experience? This guy couldn't have been chased since he was born, right? This set of actions was simply too systematic. It was really too professional. Stop. Just as he was immersed in the excitement of galloping, a group of people suddenly appeared in front of him and blocked his path. There were actually a lot of people, a total of 400 to 500 people. Actually, strictly speaking, this couldn't be considered a path, but a space in the periphery of the forest. But since Chu Yang and the others were walking, it became a path. But in this kind of place, there were actually people blocking their path? What was going on? Everyone was shocked. Could it be that Mo Yunqian's people had caught up? And they were lying in ambush here? Even though they had escaped their pursuers one after another, everyone, including Chu Yang, was still jittery and paranoid. They would be on tenterhooks for a long time at the slightest movement. Now that so many people had appeared, how could they not be afraid? But when everyone looked carefully, they couldn't help but feel anger rise in their hearts, and evil thoughts grew in their heart. They saw that the cultivation of this group of people wasn't very high, but they were all outstanding. This wasn't a description, they were really outstanding, and there was a thick furry tail behind them, their ears were straight, and their mouths were sharp, the wolf clan. Chu Yang suddenly remembered. So it was this group of people. This group of people really persevered. The wolf clan had been chasing Greasy Cat all this time. But since the arrival of many supersects, Chu Yang had also improved his cultivation. At first, he still wanted to avenge Greasy Cat, but the people of the wolf clan had unexpectedly disappeared and their whereabouts were unknown. No one knew where they had gone. It turned out that this group of people hadn't given up and were actually hiding here. Who are you people? A werewolf looked at the people in front of him, somewhat bewildered. Have you seen a chubby member of the Meow clan? Is there something wrong with your eyes? Look at who here looks like a member of the Meow clan. Chu Yang didn't give this group of people a chance to speak at all. His calamity sword flashed coldly, and he took the lead and rushed forward. When blood splattered, at least a dozen werewolves had already fallen to the ground. They couldn't find them earlier, but now that they encountered them, how could they let them go? Kill them, don't leave a single one alive. Chu Yang shouted, the only thing to be careful is to not damage their backpacks. You must not. The backpacks of these werewolves seemed to be their unique symbol. Every one of them would carry one on their back. Should there be a change of clothes or something else inside? However, because of this chance encounter, Chu Yang suddenly had some ideas. When this group of people attacked together, their efficiency was unusually high. It was really like chopping melons and vegetables. It was an absolute one-sided massacre. These werewolves were certainly considered experts among ordinary people. The leader was even at the peak of the heaven stage, close to the level of a saint. But under the siege of more than 200 experts, the weakest of whom was at the saint stage, they were all blasted to pieces in the blink of an eye. They didn't even have a chance to say a word. Everyone was anxiously running for their lives. Who would be interested in mushrooms with them? In just an instant, the ground was swept clean. Then, a brand new group of werewolves appeared at the periphery of the forest. Everyone's cultivation was extremely high, and they hurried on like the wind. Chapter 1968. It had to be said that under Chu Yang's leadership, everyone actually had the temperament of a true werewolf. This should be entirely attributed to Luo Ku Di. On the other side, in the completely sealed and isolated tribulation space, Tai Butian and the others almost immediately fell into the turbulent and surging waves of rich spiritual energy almost as soon as they entered. They were tumbling and bobbing inside, like a small boat struggling to survive in an incomparably huge sea. In a general sense, for cultivators, the purer and denser the spiritual energy, the better it was. However, when this excess exceeded the limit, or even greatly exceeded the limit of tolerance, the best tonic would become a huge poison. Going too far was as bad as falling short. At this moment, the spiritual energy in the tribulation space was only a fine line away from becoming a lethal poison. Tai Biu Tian and Wu Qian Qian were the first in line to enter. So, they naturally stayed together. However, the two women were under the impact of the violent spiritual energy. So, they couldn't see or touch the other person. In fact, they couldn't even think of the other person. That was because they couldn't even think of the other person. At this point in time, the only thing she could think of, or rather, the only thing she could think of every moment was, hurry up and collect the spiritual energy that was forcibly instilled into her body. Perhaps, her body would explode from this spiritual energy if she was a little late. This was originally an unimaginable land of feng shui. However, at this moment, it was full of tranquility and danger. For the first time, everyone discovered that too much and too dense spiritual energy could be fatal. When one's cultivation was low, it could cause one to explode. However, when one's cultivation was high, it could still cause one to explode at any time. One could only be forced to cultivate wholeheartedly, cultivate to the limit, refine, digest, and forcibly evolve to improve one's cultivation. This was like a person who had been eating non-stop. His mouth was constantly stuffed with food. Because he couldn't stop eating, he could only constantly exercise to the limit to digest. Because once he relaxed a little, he might choke to death from the food, or directly explode from the excessive amount of food in his stomach. When they first came in, everyone felt as if they were in heaven. They were extremely excited, and everyone was racing against time to cultivate. However, this situation lasted for less than a day, and everyone began to complain in their hearts. If this continued, it would be impossible for him to not race against time. What kind of place was this? It was simply an unconventional place that would take his life. Unknowingly, the tribulation space, which had been completely sealed, was slowly expanding. Because of this accident, the originally nearly perfect space had evolved once again, evolving to an even more perfect state. As for the palace of the Medicine King, it was slowly disintegrating due to the evolution of the tribulation space. Only the purple cloud pagoda was still standing in the center. The 10 saint crystals and 1 divine crystal had already reached the top of the purple firmament tower. Each floor was emitting a flickering light. In the herb field, in the atmosphere filled with extremely rich and pure spirit chi, the 3 spirit medicines were breathing in large mouthfuls of spirit chi with contented expressions. Although their bodies were still the same size as before, there was already an obvious color of blood on their bodies. If it was said that they were as white as snow before, now it was as if they were dyed with a layer of rosy red. As for the surrounding spiritual herbs, they were also growing at a crazy speed. In the process of crazy growth, spiritual herbs were constantly reaching their peak age. Under normal circumstances, it was extremely difficult for herbs to exceed their own limits. Once they reached their peak age, they could only slowly wither. Previously, in the palace of the Medicine King, Chu Yang and the Sword Spirit had seen such a situation. But in the tribulation space, it was a different situation. As long as a spiritual herb reached its peak age and its medicinal efficacy reached its peak, the spirit medicines would have already waved their small hands to instantly absorb the purest surging medicinal efficacy. Then, they would repeatedly absorb the external spirit chi and gradually reach their peak, gradually forming a kind of unique cycle. With such an endless supply of medicinal efficacy and the vast and endless spirit chi, even the spirit medicines were gradually unable to absorb it all. They could only condense a snow-white pill every once in a while and place it in front of them with a pained expression. In just a few days, the number of elixirs in front of Yarrow Ling's body had already exceeded 10, and this number was still increasing. The sword spirit stood quietly with his eyes closed, quietly enduring the cleansing of the pure spirit chi. He was trying hard to open up a new path that no one in the Phoenix clan had ever walked before. In the past, the Phoenix clan's cultivation techniques had only reached the heavenly human stage and there was no further progress. In order to achieve a breakthrough, the sword spirit was determined to create his own cultivation techniques. The Phoenix clan's cultivation techniques were also the result of continuous research by the predecessors. Since the predecessors could create their own cultivation techniques, why can't I create an even more profound cultivation technique? The sword spirit had such a thought, but he didn't know what kind of glory his intentions would bring to the Phoenix clan in the future. There were no absolutes in the world. Often, daring to dream was already half the battle won. Although the rest might require countless efforts to achieve, the first step was always the key. On the other side, Greasy Cat and Lazy were full of pain. Although the two of them were together, they were so overwhelmed by the spirit chi that they didn't even have time to say a word. Both of them were only at the heaven stage. In such an atmosphere, it was difficult for them to survive. Xie Dan Feng, Huyen Aobo, Madame Mai, and the others were also in the same situation. Their cultivations were still below the two cats. No, they hadn't even reached the earth grade. Their strength was really very shallow. However, it was precisely because of this that their breakthroughs were relatively faster. The transformation of their physiques was also more thorough. Strictly speaking, they would obtain the greatest improvement in a short period of time. Everyone's cultivation was soaring. Du and Sungkong and Wang Dao, who were ranked third and fourth, were on the left and right respectively. As the spirit qi whistled around them, the saber qi gradually circled and danced, gradually becoming sharp and lofty, extremely swift and fierce. Although Lightning Snake and the others were slightly on the periphery, the level of the spirit qi that they were enduring was still extremely terrifying. In such an environment at this moment, there was no time to consider anything else. The spirit qi in this space was simply endless. The purity and richness of the spirit qi didn't discriminate based on the strength of each person's cultivation. Those with low cultivation were gradually improving, and those with high cultivation were also gradually improving. It was like a person in a sea. Those who could drink water could only drink what they could, and those who couldn't drink water could only drink what they could bear. If there was a difference, it was just that those with bigger stomachs could drink a few more mouthfuls. Those with smaller stomachs naturally couldn't hold more. If they really drank too much and their stomachs couldn't bear it, then it would be a tragedy. This was obviously a wonderful phenomenon. However, among all the people who were enduring the spirit qi, the one who suffered the most was still Chu Yang. Others were unscrupulously trying their best to improve, but Chu Yang was the only one who couldn't. In such a tense place of escape, rashly improving was courting death. Therefore, Chu Yang could only suppress it. He restrained himself and forcibly controlled the spirit qi. As the owner of the tribulation space, the spirit qi that he was enduring was of the highest level. He couldn't stop it at all. Running with all his might all the way, he couldn't exhaust even 1/10,000th of the spirit qi. Right now, his dantian was already full. There was no more missing. Metal, wood, water, fire, and earth transformed into each other. The qi of life and death transformed into each other. The qi of heaven and earth converged into yin and yang. Every dantian was in a full state. So Chu Yang could only try to adjust the consumption of a part of the spirit qi while running to the limit and compress it to the limit. He compressed it fiercely, and it was so pure that it couldn't be compressed anymore. He used all possible means to compress the space bit by bit in order to accommodate the huge amount of spirit qi that seemed to have no limit. However, no matter how much he compressed and purified it to the limit, the little space he got was just a drop in the bucket. It was filled up again in an instant. Damn it! He compressed the power of his dantian again and again, almost crazily, to create a space that could accommodate new spirit qi. This process sounded simple, but it was actually extremely difficult. If it was just difficult, it was still okay. This process was extremely dangerous. There was the danger of qi deviation at every turn. This process should only be carried out in the quietest environment. No one could disturb him during the process. But Chu Yang didn't have such conditions at all. He could only complete it with great difficulty while running crazily. He had to bear the huge pressure of life and death at all times. He had to take care of every detail and every decision of his escape. He had to consider all the possible unexpected situations and think about the next step at all times. His heart was divided into 8 parts, but he had to take care of all aspects. He couldn't make any mistakes. On one hand, he had to choose the safest and most cautious escape route. He couldn't make any mistakes. Once he made a mistake, everyone would die together. On the other hand, he had to find a better anti-tracking method to confuse the enemy. If he didn't succeed, everyone would die. On the other hand, he had to pay attention to everyone's mental state. If he found any signs of danger, if he passed this stage, what about the next one? How could he continue to live strong at this moment? But at this time, the spirit qi from the tribulation space was still constantly scouring and compressing. He also had to pay attention to compressing his dantian and delay the opportunity to break through. Every time he succeeded in compressing it, The compressed space would quickly be filled with new spirit chi in an instant. The only thing he could do was to continue compressing it. Continue compressing it. Compressing it again. He just couldn't break through. Chu Yang felt that he was suffering from internal and external problems. He was suffering from internal and external problems. He was being ambushed from all sides. He had 1,000 kinds of feelings and all kinds of pain, but under such unimaginable hardships, Chu Yang actually completed them one by one. Chapter 1969. Chu Yang himself didn't even realize that the primordial real silk that had already been thinned out in his dantian was slowly increasing in number. Initially, when there was only one dantian, the primordial real silk was suspended in the middle. But now, every dantian was overflowing with spiritual energy. Basically, after a short period of time, a strand of primordial real silk would form and then quietly sink down to the bottom. And then, another strand, and another. The primordial real silk at the bottom grew more and more, and the primordial real silk in every dantian was different. Some were gold, some were green, some were grey, some were blue. Originally, the spiritual energy in Chu Yang's dantian was all in a gaseous state and then gradually turned into a mist. But now, it had already turned into a semi-liquid state and was thick. And Chu Yang was still madly compressing it. Perhaps the current Chu Yang still didn't know that it was this escape and this extremely harsh environment that allowed him to make a very special breakthrough. And this special breakthrough was even more important than breaking through to the heavenly human level, or even the saint level. Originally, his advancement had been too fast, and most of it had been done by external forces. No matter how miraculous the heavenly fortune pill was, and how compatible it was with his body, it was still an external force. Although it wouldn't cause any negative effects, it would still cause his foundation to be somewhat shaky. However, after this round of tempering, Chu Yang's foundation had become unbelievably solid. Or it could be said that this kind of firmness was something that no one in the entire Heaven Imperial Court had ever had before. This dantian also started to be used for real during this process. The group of 200 people broke through the forest like the wind and entered a stretch of grassland. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. This stretch of grassland was rarely visited by people since ancient times. It was as tall as a person. When 200 people entered this stretch of grassland, it was like 200 water droplets entering the sea. There were very few traces to be found. A feeling of safety that they hadn't felt for a long time flooded their minds at this moment. After going deeper into the grassland for 150 kilometers, someone was the first to roll his eyes and fall to the ground. He didn't lose consciousness, but fell asleep directly and entered the so-called deep sleep state. With one person as an example, the other 200 or so people all fell down in a disorderly manner. Everyone's face was filled with the joy of surviving a calamity as they panted heavily. However, they were truly exhausted. Although everyone was a top-notch expert with a steady mind, it was really too tiring to stay in this state of extreme flight for a long time without daring to relax. Everyone had already reached their limit half a day ago. Being able to persevere until here was already an extremely rare thing. They really couldn't persevere any longer. Chu Yang finally heaved a sigh of relief. This time, when he relaxed, he immediately felt that his 2 legs were sore and numb, and he could barely lift them. This was the consequence of suddenly relaxing one's mind under a mountain-like pressure. Chu Yang was very clear about this. In fact, he wasn't unfamiliar with it. But now, it was indeed time to relax. Otherwise, not only these 200 people, but even Chu Yang himself wouldn't be able to hold on for long. Although they had not seen any signs of their pursuers, they had not experienced much swordlight and swordlight either. However, the danger was greater than any of the previous times, because as long as they saw a trace of their pursuers, they would be completely wiped out. Because the enemy this time was too strong. So strong that they didn't dare to face them directly. However, even Chu Yang himself didn't expect that he would reach this prairie so smoothly. What is Meng Wu Ye doing now? What is he thinking about? I believe that it's impossible for him to lose me. Since I have seen this prairie, then Meng Wu Ye will certainly see the importance of this prairie. He won't let it go so easily. Chu Yang panted heavily as he pondered. His gaze unconsciously slid across the grass in front of him. Suddenly, his gaze tightened, and his heart beat violently for no reason. Chu Yang suddenly realized that he had overlooked an extremely important detail: the season. It was already late autumn. Although the grass still had a little bit of green, in fact, it didn't have much vitality and water. Most of the grass had already shown signs of drying up. Suddenly, Chu Yang felt his scalp go numb. He suddenly jumped up, and his complexion instantly became deathly pale. "Manor Lord Chu, what's wrong?" Che Shu Chu was lying on the grass next to him. He was panting tiredly, and looked like a dead fish. Seeing Chu Yang suddenly jump up in panic, he couldn't help but ask in surprise. Che Shu Chu and Chu Yang hadn't known each other for a long time. But Che Shu Chu had a considerable understanding of Chu Yang's personality. He was very clear that this temporary lord's countenance wouldn't change even if a mountain were to collapse in front of him. But even he had lost his composure at this moment. So, this undoubtedly meant that something very serious and negative was about to happen. Perhaps, it had already happened. "Quick, tell everyone to get up and leave immediately. We have to leave in the shortest time and with the fastest speed. Leave this prairie." Chu Yang's complexion was deathly pale. "Right now, looking for us in this prairie is like looking for a needle in a haystack. It's the best time to rest. Why are you in such a hurry? What's wrong?" Che Shu Chu also felt that something was wrong, but he still couldn't help but ask. He was really too tired. "There's no time to explain. Quick." Chu Yang kicked his body. Then, his body turned like a whirlwind, and he kicked everyone up one by one. Chu Yang used his strength very cleverly. He didn't hurt the muscles or bones of the people he kicked, but they would feel extreme pain. Even if they were in a deep sleep, they would still wake up. "Let's go," Chu Yang ordered. Everyone was full of resentment as they hurried along the way. They finally found a good place to take a breather, but this Villa Master Chu seemed to have gone crazy and kicked everyone up. What the hell is going on? Along the way, they couldn't help but grumble and complain incessantly. But Chu Yang turned a deaf ear to them, and only focused on rushing forward. Anyone who lagged behind or didn't listen to orders would be beheaded in public. There was no room for hesitation at this critical moment. Under the pressure of death, Chu Yang beheaded 3 people in a row. Then, everyone resumed their speed. No matter how resentful, no matter how slow, and no matter how tired they were, it was still better than going to hell. The grassland in front of them was like the waves of the sea. The wind was blowing fiercely behind them. The wind was getting stronger and stronger, and Chu Yang's heart became more and more anxious. After running for about 200 miles, the strength that they had just gathered had completely disappeared. Their hearts were filled with dissatisfaction. But at this time, someone suddenly sniffed, "Hey, what's this smell?" He turned his head to look. With one look, he was scared out of his wits. Hundreds of miles behind them, the wind was blowing fiercely, and the fire had already soared to the sky. Half of the sky was burning red. Now, the fire that filled the sky was chasing after the crowd along with the violent wind. Its power was extremely terrifying. "Fire! Fire! There's a fire behind us!" This person shouted in panic. "Everyone, don't look back." Chu Yang fiercely ordered everyone, "Quickly run for your lives. If you can't run out of the grassland, you'll be caught and turned into roasted pigs." Chu Yang sighed from the bottom of his heart. Meng Wu Yai's reaction was a step faster than he had expected. He must have ordered the fire as soon as he saw this grassland. There was no hesitation at all. Moreover, the speed of their pursuit was twice as fast as what he had expected in the worst-case scenario. At this moment, everyone felt as if they had suddenly obtained an endless amount of energy. Under the boundless fear, their originally weak and limp legs suddenly had an inexhaustible amount of energy. Run like crazy. With everyone's cultivation, they were naturally not afraid of a mere grassland fire. But the truly terrifying ones were the people who set the fire. Once this grassland was burned to the ground, there would be no chance for them to survive if they continued to linger on the grassland. Even if they dug a hole and hid underground, they would be dug out in the shortest time possible. The only way to survive was to quickly leave the grassland. Fierce wind, fierce fire. In the fierce wind, in front of the fierce fire, they ran at top speed. A person's strength was limited. Under the pursuit of the fire that filled the sky, they were quickly closing in. This was already an exhausted group of people who were at the end of their rope. There was a trace of despair on everyone's face. Don't be afraid. Although the fire is a crisis, it is also a turning point. Chu Yang shouted, "We are in front of the fire, and they are behind it. The fire is the best thing to block the detection of divine sense. Moreover, there is smoke everywhere. They will definitely not be able to determine our direction in a short time. The fire can certainly burn us out, but it will also completely block their detection. The current situation is that as long as we can escape from this fire, then we will have at least 2 hours of buffer time. This fire is undoubtedly a disaster. But we left early, so it can be considered as helping us indirectly. We are now looking for a way out in the face of death. As long as we don't give up, hope will not abandon us." Chu Yang's words at this moment were honestly very far-fetched, and it was also very wishful thinking. But when these words were heard by everyone, their spirits were suddenly shaken. It made sense. If there was a turning point, there would be a chance of survival. If there was hope, there would be a future, a bright future. Therefore, everyone gritted their teeth and ran forward, stirring up all their life potential to move forward. Most of them felt ashamed in their hearts. They had previously complained about the Manor Master, but now they knew how childish they were. After so many years of experience in the martial world, they were actually not as good as a young man. They even had to complain about him. If not for Manor Master Chu, if they had really waited until they saw the fire and started to run, then none of them would have been spared. Chapter 1970. Once this thought arose in everyone's mind, in addition to fear, they also felt a sense of guilt. Unknowingly, Chu Yang's image in the eyes of these people had become more trustworthy. Now, if one were to say that Chu Yang was their only savior, none of these people would refute it. Because this was the truth. Meng Wu Ya led the army in a big circle to determine the correct direction of Chu Yang and the others. Then, he chased after them at full speed. However, by the time he saw the corpses of the werewolves in the forest, Chu Yang and the others had already left. Meng Wu Ya knew that he could not let the situation worsen. If things continued to develop, he might not have the opportunity to catch up with anyone. So, he urged the whole army to forcefully stimulate their own energy. Without any hesitation, they finally arrived at the edge of the grassland. However, when they saw the vast grassland in front of them that was undulating like waves, all of them felt a little depressed. Everyone knew that it was simply a fool's dream to find 200 people in such a place. Whether it was divine sense detection, aerial observation, or other investigative methods, nothing could be done in such a terrain. However, Meng Wu Ya did not hesitate. He only glanced at it, and immediately gave an unexpected order. However, it was also the most correct order at the moment: burn. With this order, thousands of people began to move at the same time. Countless flames gradually rose. Using the wind and their own cultivation, the flames intensified and spread. In an instant, the raging flames soared into the sky. Waves of black smoke rose. In the blink of an eye, it had already filled the entire world. Seeing this, everyone cheered loudly. If Chu Yang and the others were here, they would not be able to hide under this fire. And this was indeed an excellent place to hide. From the countless traces and speculations that they had obtained before, it was clear that Chu Yang and the others were in this grassland. Moreover, they must have fallen into an extreme state of exhaustion. This time, they were doomed to be unable to fly even if they had wings. Only Meng Wu Ya was not blindly optimistic. He frowned and stood in front of the soaring flames. He calmly observed all the movements in the fire. He knew that Chu Yang must be somewhere in this grassland at this moment if there wasn't this big fire. He believed that Chu Yang would have countless methods and tactics to completely escape and shatter his pursuit. Therefore, he could only take drastic measures to extinguish the fire. However, Chu Yang would probably take advantage of the intensity of the fire to escape quickly after it was set on fire. His divine sense was no longer useful. Unless Chu Yang was in the middle of the prairie when the fire started. And that was also the safest place in the entire terrain. In that case, it would be difficult for Chu Yang to soar even if he had wings. However, Meng Wu Yue believed that Chu Yang was definitely not there. This trust came inexplicably. Even Meng Wu Yue himself didn't want to believe this, but this belief was deeply imprinted in Meng Wu Yue's heart, as if it was the truth, the reality. The fire spread rapidly. Steaming heat waves rose into the air. It completely isolated the probing of divine sense. Meng Wu Yue furrowed his brows as he watched the wind blow and the fire spread rapidly. A large area of black ash appeared in front of him. Meng Wu Yue waved his hand. Everyone, gather. Chase after the fire, General. An officer beside him wanted to say something but hesitated. The fire was burning now. Chasing after the fire to search at this time was definitely more uncomfortable than searching after the fire, and Meng Wu Yue was seriously injured. He was afraid that it would harm his body. Quickly carry out the order. 5,000 people spread out in a fan shape and follow the fire closely. Pay special attention to the ground. Immediately turn around and turn over the soil wherever you go. Completely suppress the ashes. Meng Wu Yue ordered with a stern face. This order killed 2 birds with 1 stone. If Chu Yang and the others were really trapped by the fire and wanted to hide underground to avoid the fire and people, then they would inevitably be found out. 5,000 people spread out and followed the fire. Separated by a distance, they braved the fierce heat waves and entered the burning prairie. The distance between each person was only 10 feet. Like a huge net, they spread out towards the depths of the prairie where the smoke was rising from all directions. Immediately send a message to the flying ship on the opposite side. Tell the people on standby to go towards the smoke from the opposite side. Also, spread a net to surround and completely strangle the other side's living space. Yes. At this moment, Meng Wu Yue was still being carried by 4 people. His eagle-like eyes looked at the ground in all directions from time to time. His sage-level divine sense also spread out. It was truly an inescapable net. Chu Yang once again made a mistake in his calculations. He had originally predicted that at least after the fire had completely burned, Mo Yuntian's people would enter the prairie to search for traces of them. But after this, Chu Yang miscalculated. Mo Yuntian's people had indeed entered the prairie after the fire had burned, but not after it had completely burned. They had already entered the prairie when the fire was still burning in front of them. Chu Yang led everyone and rushed towards the edge of the prairie against the raging fire behind them. As the fierce wind was still chasing after Chu Yang and the others, although the fire had not really burned them yet, the extremely hot air had already spread over first. In front of them, it had already been burned into a vacuum. It was completely impossible to breathe. Looking out, it was also a space that was already distorted and tumbling by the heat waves. There was still the last 20 miles. Chu Yang took the lead and shouted in a low voice, "Don't turn back. No one is to turn back." Once they turned back and saw the overwhelming fire, their legs would immediately go soft. As long as they went soft, it would be completely over. Chu Yang and the others rushed into the mountain range in front of them like a whirlwind. Then, Chu Yang's heart moved and his face changed greatly. Mountains. What kind of existence were mountains? Of course, mountains were full of stones. But there was no lack of grass and trees on any mountain, and behind them, the fire was only tens of miles away. It would catch up in a moment. Although they had already left the prairie, after entering the mountains, they still had to face the situation of being chased by the fire. The worst thing was, under the illumination of the fire, Chu Yang and the others had nowhere to hide. Originally, it was already evening. The darkness of the night could be made use of, but now, the darkness and the fire had become fatal things. And right at the foot of the mountain, there was a river. That was the best way to get rid of the fire. It was also the most convenient way now. But Chu Yang gave up without hesitation. After such a raging fire, the enemy's attention would definitely be focused on the word water. So, no matter what, they could not go to the river now. Villa Master, I have an idea. An expert said softly. What idea? We can set fire on the spot. This way, we can clear out a section of the area. When the fire burns over, we don't have to worry so much. The expert was a little excited. He had always felt strange. Using fire to subdue fire, using fire to stop fire. This was clearly the best way to solve the problem. Why did the intelligent Villa Master Chu not think of it? Could it be that he was really muddle-headed? Bastard. Before Chu Yang could speak, a few people could not help but curse. Do you think that what we are really afraid of is the fire? This kind of fire can be easily suppressed by anyone. Even if we let the fire burn, it won't harm our lives. What we are afraid of is Mo Yuntian after the fire. And Meng Wu Ya with the strength of a sage. Once we set fire here, won't we tell them our approximate location? We have been running for so long. The best advantage, or perhaps the only advantage, is that our location has never been locked. You actually suggested setting fire? Using fire to stop fire. Do you want to kill everyone? A few experienced elders were so angry that their eyes almost popped out of their sockets. If it wasn't for the urgent situation, they would have fiercely beaten this guy up. He didn't do anything but cause trouble. That person's face immediately turned red. Everyone was talking and discussing, but their speed did not slow down at all. Now, they had already rushed into the forest of the mountain range. With everyone's cultivation, as long as they wanted to escape, and as long as they still had strength, this kind of fire would definitely not be able to catch up with them before their cultivation was exhausted. The fierce wind passed through the mountain, whimpering like crying. Then, the wind changed direction, and it was like thousands of ghosts were crying. Let's escape on this mountain. Chu Yang made a prompt decision. As for the fire, let it burn however it want. But we have to get as far away as possible before the fire. This sudden fire may already be the fire of our lives. Before it burns out, our lives will not end. The crackling sounds behind them did not stop. Obviously, the fire had already begun to spread into the mountain range. At this moment, Chu Yang and the others had already entered the depths of the mountain forest. At this moment, if someone stood high up in the sky and looked down at the whole situation, he would discover a strange phenomenon. A streak of fire was rapidly advancing like a gigantic dragon. It was unstoppable. Behind the fire was Mo Yuntian and the others, who were everywhere. Meng Wuya sat at the back and commanded. 5,000 people turned the entire grassland upside down, and their speed was still extremely fast. They were only a dozen miles away from the front of the burning fire. And, the front of this fire had already begun to rush into the mountains, and filled the forest that was covered in flames. Chu Yang and the others were like a twisted gust of wind, and pierced through the depths of the forest towards the opposite side at lightning speed. On the opposite side of the mountain range, in front of Chu Yang and the others in a straight line, the other half of the 5,000 black cloud guards and silver-armored soldiers were spread out all over the mountains and plains, searching over like mercury flowing down the ground. According to the speed of the two sides, they would meet head-on in at most an hour. Once they came into contact, Chu Yang and the others would be attacked from two sides, and they would be like dumplings wrapped in dumplings. And all of this, the people of the three sides were still unaware of it at this moment. The great crisis that belonged to Chu Yang and the others was gradually approaching. Continue writing the fourth chapter. Requesting monthly votes. Chapter 1971. The people behind Chu Yang kept their mouths tightly shut. Everyone knew that they were in an extremely dangerous situation at this moment. If they were discovered by the enemy, it would mean that there was no chance for them to escape. At this time, everyone kept their distance from each other according to their previous agreement. The team was instantly divided into 4 groups. Time passed little by little. The curtain of night had already fallen. However, the fire that had spread for thousands of miles lit up this dark space as if it was daytime. The time it took for a stick of incense to burn passed in the blink of an eye. Behind the fire, someone shouted in surprise, "General Meng, we found 3 corpses here." Meng Wuye was startled. He immediately went over. They are the disciples of those two sects. All of them were beheaded by a sword. They were killed in one move. Meng Wuye looked at the corpses. He raised his head and thought carefully. Then, he said decisively, this should be the process of their escape. They were beheaded by Chu Yang as a warning to others. If that is the case, they should have escaped before the fire started. Otherwise, these three people would not have been beheaded because of some kind of resistance. So, they are most likely not in the grassland now. Everyone, pass through the fire at full speed. The whole army is in pursuit. But, why did they resist? Is it because the previous series of movements were too tiring? And, this grassland gives people a rare sense of security. Although this sense of security is just a false package, it is real. Since they have already killed people because of this fleeing team should be on the verge of falling apart. It is a team that has been forcibly put together for the same purpose. It lacks the basic run-in. It is not going to be a big deal. It is not going to be a big deal. Meng Wuye was carried over the raging fire. He said indifferently, since that is the case, our men are coming from the opposite direction. We need to cut off their escape route. We can capture them in one fell swoop and complete the task in one fell swoop. The 5,000 men heard this and their spirits were lifted. Their speed increased sharply. The opportunity to complete the task was in front of them. Naturally, they chased with all their might. Chu Yang's original black clothes had changed. Now, it was filled with other colors. He was moving forward. Suddenly, he was startled. He stopped moving forward. It was not only him. Among the 117 people, 100 showed the same expression. There was someone ahead. In fact, it wasn't just the front that was approaching. People were approaching from all directions. When they discovered the enemy, the ink cloud guards on the other side had also discovered them. Suddenly, someone shouted, "There's someone in front. It should be the target murderer. Charge." The next moment, 7 or 8 swords pierced into the vital parts of his body almost at the same time. Countless destructive vital essence exploded in his body, but he only laughed. "Leave quickly." Suddenly, his body exploded with a boom. The explosion was so sudden that it shook the heavens and earth. Behind Chu Yang, someone let out a long sigh. "Don't sigh. We don't have the time for that now. Leave quickly." Chu Yang rushed out. This was the best time to escape. It was not that Chu Yang was not sad, but now was definitely not the time to be sad. A series of explosions rang out. Those 48 people all chose to burn their spiritual energy and vitality to the extreme, and then rushed into the dense group of enemies to explode to death. They used their own lives to open up a path forward, and used their blood to create a path of escape. In the place where flesh and blood were scattered, the people they wanted to protect passed through just like that. In a situation where everyone's strength was about the same. These people burned all their remaining vitality and spiritual energy to the extreme. The power that could be exerted at the moment of self-explosion was at least 3 or 4 times stronger than under normal circumstances. How could Mo Yuntian and the others withstand it? No matter how fearless the ink cloud guards were, they were not truly fearless of death. But in the face of such enemies, they were also at their wits' end. As many as 70 to 80 ink cloud guards were buried in the place of these expert self-explosion. In addition, there were also many who were seriously injured by the shock. Chu Yang showed no mercy. He swept past like the wind, and with one sword, he killed all of them. "You must survive." The last expert of the 4th squad roared. Boom! A loud explosion was heard. There were only about 20 ink cloud guards left in front of him. The situation seemed to have reversed in an instant. No. In the distance, there was the sound of clothes fluttering in the air. Several voices shouted together, "At all cost. Stop Chu Yang." Large groups of ink cloud guards were rushing over one after another. The opportunity was fleeting. There was no room for hesitation. Chu Yang let out an extremely sorrowful roar. The calamity sword flashed, and he rushed straight over with his sword. Behind him, a total of 140 people were like a cone, and Chu Yang was the tip of the cone. Calamity sword technique. What harm was there in slaughtering the whole world? The Calamity sword brought out an extremely dazzling sword aura and shot straight through the air. It went straight for the defensive line of the Ink Cloud Guard. Ding ding dang dang. In front of the unparalleled sharpness of the Calamity sword, countless weapons had no room to fight back and broke one after another. Fresh blood splashed out from the chests of the Ink Cloud Guards. In just an instant, 7 or 8 bodies flew out, tumbling left and right. There were also whooshing sounds. Those were pieces of flesh that had been cut off by Chu Yang. Chu Yang only felt a chill on his shoulder, and a large piece of his flesh flew out just like that. A sword suddenly shot out horizontally. It was powerful and heavy. Chu Yang didn't stop at all. Maintaining the momentum of flying, he shook his hand and used the move One Ray of Cold Light Pierces 10,000 Fathoms. Thousands of cold lights flashed out. That Ink Cloud Guard had no room to resist at all. He fell down without a sound, and blood splattered all over his body. Due to the urgency of time, Chu Yang didn't use the latest Calamity sword technique that the sword spirit had practiced recently. Although the sword technique was more powerful, he hadn't really comprehended it yet after all. If he used it rashly, there would definitely be some delay. And now, there was no room for any delay. Therefore, Chu Yang used the move that he was already familiar with. But the moment he used it, he immediately realized that the power of the sword technique now was far from what it had been in the past. Its power had increased to an extent that Chu Yang could never have imagined before. It must be known that although Chu Yang had not completely comprehended the new fused sword moves, his understanding of the original moves had unknowingly improved by another level. Although there was only a difference of 1 level, the difference in power was like the difference between heaven and earth. Puff, 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 puff. Chu Yang's body didn't stop at all. He rushed forward like a hurricane. At this moment, he didn't know what injuries and fatigue were. There was only one thought in his mind: charge out. I must charge out. The battle had only been going on for a short while, but he didn't know how many enemies he had encountered, how many he had killed, and how many weapons he had broken. The people behind him followed closely. The shadows on both sides constantly hacked at them with swords and sabers at lightning speed. This team that was charging out was also constantly losing members. As long as someone's leg was injured, he would immediately leave the team and charge toward the opponent who had injured him. He would explode and die. With 2 clangs, 2 broken swords suddenly flew up into the sky. 2 burly figures staggered back to the sides. Chu Yang roared and rushed forward in a straight line. There was only one Ink Cloud Guard left in front of him, the last one. Chapter 1972. Seeing Chu Yang rushing up like a madman, this Ink Cloud Guard couldn't help but feel a burst of inexplicable fear. He leaned to the side and actually made way for Chu Yang. Chu Yang suddenly felt empty in front of him. He had actually rushed out of the encirclement. Bastard! Why didn't you stop him? Why did you dodge? Are you afraid of that person? The 2 Ink Cloud Guards who were staggering back roared loudly. Before they could stop their momentum of retreat, they had already seen Chu Yang break through the last line of defense. They couldn't help but roar and scold angrily. That Ink Cloud Guard seemed to have woken up from a dream at this point. He shouted wildly and turned to chase, but he was swarmed by the people of the 2 big sects. Each person chopped him into meat paste with a sword. Everyone, follow me closely. Chu Yang didn't even turn his head as he shouted. His body was still dripping with blood as he rushed into the forest on the opposite side. Behind him, everyone tried their best to catch up. This group of people sneaked into the dense forest like a whirlwind. In the distance, a strong wind wrapped in flames swept over overwhelmingly. In front of the flames were Meng Wuya and his subordinates. Everyone was rushing over here as fast as a meteor. On the left and right sides, there were also countless figures rushing over. In less than 30 breaths of time, it was the difference between life and death. Where's Chu Yang? Where is he? Someone asked angrily. Hiss. Some people looked at the tragic scene and sucked in a breath of cold air. In any case, Chu Yang had finally broken through this death blockade and left without a second thought. The best and most dangerous deadlock was broken. The ink cloud guards and the silver-armored soldiers didn't hesitate too much. They immediately split up. First, more than 100 people chased after, and then more than 1,000 people chased after them one after another after asking about the situation. After another half an incense stick of time, Meng Wuya finally arrived. "Where is he?" Meng Wuya asked angrily. "He escaped." An inky cloud guard commander lowered his head in shame. There were more than a dozen sword wounds on his body that hadn't been bandaged yet. Blood was flowing out of all of them. Every sword wound was so deep that the bones could be seen. If this commander's cultivation hadn't reached the peak of the celestial being level, he would have died from his serious injuries. Escaped? How did he escape? Meng Wuya couldn't believe what was happening in front of his eyes. It was obviously a death trap. How could he have escaped? Things have changed too suddenly. Our 5,000 people have formed a huge net. They came to outflank Chu Yang's group, but because they were too scattered, they didn't have time to regroup. In the first round, 40 to 50 people self-detonated at the same time. A path was blasted open. In the end, that ink cloud guard commander was ashamed, heartbroken, and dejected. In a very short time, Meng Wuya checked the situation at the scene, and after looking at it, he let out a long sigh. "They're all the corpses of our own people. There isn't even a single corpse over there. At most, there are only some broken limbs." Meng Wuya's voice was filled with sincere respect. "They're really thorough, General. These people must have gone mad. It's as if they don't care about their own lives." That ink cloud guard commander's body swayed. Finally, he couldn't support himself and fell to the ground. "Facing such an enemy, we are completely helpless. Conventional battle tactics are completely useless, and we can't avoid them. We can only use our own bodies to resist. So many brothers sacrificed themselves like this. The situation at that time was really too tragic. How many people did we lose in this battle?" Meng Wuya asked. "Ink Cloud Guard, 170 people died. 35 silver-armored soldiers." That Ink Cloud Guard commander smiled bitterly. "More than 200 brothers died just like that. It only took half a cup of tea's time from beginning to end." Meng Wuya sighed deeply. At that time, 10,000 people had followed him out. So far, close to 1,000 had been lost. Although more than 10% of the targeted enemies had been killed, the remaining people were probably more difficult to deal with. As a general, what kind of enemies were the most difficult to deal with? Calm enemies, cruel enemies, enemies with brains, enemies with wisdom, and so on. Enemies who were not afraid of death, without a doubt, could always be listed in the top 3 of this list. Meng Wuya was silent for a while. He looked at the soldiers beside him. "I brought these people out. In the future, how many of them can safely return with me? And how many of them will be buried here forever?" He said silently, "Chase." No matter what, things had come to this point. There was no turning back, and there was no turning back. Chu Yang couldn't, and he couldn't either. At this moment, Chu Yang's whole body was almost rotten. Since that unavoidable battle in the dense forest, the battles had been one after another. He didn't know when he would encounter a group of people. After a battle, he would fight desperately and finally break out of the encirclement and escape. Then, not long after, he would encounter another group of people again. It continued like this, as if it had become some kind of cycle. The pursuit was like a drizzle in the sky, a continuous rain in autumn. Once it started, it would be endless and never stop. Now, it was raining, and the ground was fighting. The rain continued to fall, and the battles continued one after another. Chu Yang could only guarantee one thing now: he would use all means to not be surrounded by the enemy. But encountering a battle was destined to be unavoidable. It was a situation that he had to face. Compared to the others, Chu Yang's body was undoubtedly the most injured. Although his cultivation was not the highest among them, he had to rush to the front. This was because he was now the soul of this team. If Chu Yang had not been rushing forward and opening a path, these people would have been in despair. Only Chu Yang could give these people a subtle feeling of "we still have hope." Roughly estimating, The injuries on Chu Yang's body in these few days were at least 4 to 500. 4 to 500. This was a shocking number. And Chu Yang had used 4 incomplete versions of the heavy pills so far. If it wasn't for the surging spiritual energy in his body that continuously healed his wounds and increased his physical strength, even if Chu Yang had 100 heavy pills, they would have been used up long ago. Fortune and misfortune depended on each other, and misfortune hid within each other. The fusion of the tribulation space and the divine palace of the Medicine King caused the extreme backflow of spiritual energy, causing the tribulation space to be temporarily sealed. This caused Chu Yang to lose his biggest life-saving trump card, but it also provided Chu Yang with another near-perpetual source of spiritual energy, supporting Chu Yang's eternal source of power. Now, the way everyone looked at Chu Yang changed again. It was as if they were looking at a high mountain, or it should be said that they were looking at a demon. They had never seen anyone who could fight like this. Or simply using the word fight was not enough to describe the terrifying extent of his state. It seemed as if Chu Yang couldn't be beaten to death. He had rushed out of the forest of swords and sabers a moment ago. His entire body was covered in blood, and he was on the verge of death. But, the next moment, he would be full of energy, and would enter the next wave of battle in perfect condition. Once again, he was covered in wounds. Then, he fled for his life again. Once again, he participated in the battle. He was still the first to charge and take the lead, not to mention that he was made of flesh. Even if he was made of iron, he would have already fallen apart by now. But Chu Yang actually hadn't fallen yet. It seemed that he could still persist. Perhaps he could persist for a long, long time, or even forever. Everyone was first surprised, then amazed, then horrified, then admired, and finally worshipped him. After continuing to flee like this, there were only 50 people left with Chu Yang. The last 50 people. Other than the 3 who disobeyed the order and were beheaded in public, the rest of the team of 200 people had already fallen on the road of being hunted down and turned into a shocking explosion, filling the sky with flesh and blood. Chapter 1973. Once the time limit was exceeded, there was a possibility that he would never have to walk again in this lifetime. Go. Chu Yang, who was so tired that he had buried his head in dirty water, suddenly jumped up and issued an order. School www.guncom leave. Everyone smiled bitterly. Could he still walk? Everyone wanted to leave, but if they didn't, it would mean that they were inching closer and closer to death. But their physical and mental exhaustion made everyone feel like they were better off dead than alive. They truly felt that it would be better to die here than to continue fleeing without any hope. Some of them even planned to turn around and kill a few of their pursuers. At the very least, they wouldn't have to face the seemingly endless pursuit of the Grim Reaper. His throat, his stomach, and his entire internal organs seemed to be on fire. Chu Yang hesitated for a moment. Then, he took out a big bowl from his ring. He scooped a bowl of muddy soup from the ground, and then took out an incomplete version of the heavy pill. Suddenly, a fragrant aroma filled everyone's nostrils. Everyone's Adam's apple trembled up and down, and their eyes shot out a sincere desire. Chu Yang was silent for a moment. Then, he crushed the heavy pill, which was emitting a sweet fragrance at this moment, and completely dissolved it into the bowl of murky water. Chu Yang raised the bowl and said in a low voice, "Come, each of you will have a mouthful. The main thing is, don't drink it all in one gulp." Everyone was shocked and looked at each other in dismay. This was a life-saving medicine. Everyone was experienced in the Jianghu, so they naturally understood. However, at that moment, although everyone was yearning for it, they were also hesitating. Should I drink it? Can I drink it? I drank it. Was it still useful? Chu Yang moved closer to a person, but this person's reaction was to tilt his head away. He said, "You drink first. You drink first. No, you drink first." In the face of life-saving medicine, no one was willing to make the first move. Chu Yang's eyes were a little moist. He cleared his throat and said in a low voice, "Brothers, all the brothers who have survived, we have more than 150 brothers who have fallen here, and they have given their all without any regrets." He used up all of his life force just to give us a chance to escape. They were all like that. With a boom, they turned into smoke. Don't tell me you want their deaths to be in vain. No matter what, we have to hold on and give it our all. Carry on with this impossible escape until we escape with our lives. There's some medicine in this bowl of water. Drink it and you'll have more strength. Everyone, take a small sip. It should be enough. Chu Yang took a deep breath and said, everyone here is experienced in Jianghu. We can totally calculate how many people can drink this bowl of water. He only needed to drink his own mouthful. Wouldn't it be better for everyone to escape together? Even if it's not for ourselves, we have to think about those who died for us, and the people they entrusted to us. They died for us. We have to live for them and try our best to live on. Under Chu Yang's earnest and well-intentioned urging, everyone's hands and lips trembled. He took a sip. A small bite. Then, everyone clearly felt that their bodies, which had been completely dried up before, suddenly burst into a raging fire. In an instant, the energy that had disappeared started to gather again bit by bit and gradually grew. No one dared to drink too much of such a miraculous medicine. Because there was definitely not a lot of this medicine, it could be seen from how much Chu Yang treasured it. After the 50 people drank it, the big bowl returned to Chu Yang's hands. There was still a small half of it left. Chu Yang's heart ached. He took out a small jade bottle from his ring and carefully poured this half bowl of murky water into it. He carefully put it away. Everyone's eyes sparkled as they watched Chu Yang carefully put away this small half bowl of water. At this moment, something called hope inexplicably rose from the bottom of everyone's eyes. There's still some of this medicine left. Next time, everyone should take a small sip. It should be able to hold on one more time. After 2 more times, maybe we can escape with our lives. Go. Chu Yang ordered again. The 50 people moved at the same time. In the misty autumn rain, their bodies were covered in mud and they moved towards the vast unknown fate. Chu Yang didn't know how many days had passed. Ever since he started to escape, he seemed to have lost track of time. What was daytime? What was night? He couldn't tell. It was as if these were no longer important. He only knew that ever since it started to rain, he was constantly being chased. Along the way, Chu Yang had already lost count of how many battles he had encountered. Because this was also not important. The only important thing was to break out of the encirclement and survive. After breaking out of the encirclement once again, Elder Bai Yu Chen lost an arm. She only realized this after breaking out of the encirclement. Regarding this, Bai Yu Chen said self-deprecatingly, in the past, when I read some legendary novels, there would always be a battle where someone would be stabbed by a sword. After that, the battle would start again. Now I know that those are all lies. As Bai Yu Chen watched Che Shuchu bandage her wound, she said self-deprecatingly, in a battle like this, one's eyes are already red. The only thing they know is to charge out. Why would they care if they're missing a part of their body? If I was killed at that time, I would have died in such a muddle-headed way. In fact, if I really had time to think about other things, I think I would have already self-destructed. Without an arm, my fighting power would be greatly reduced. But now, I don't have such thoughts. What's the big deal about losing an arm? I still have an arm, and a right hand that can hold a sword. It doesn't matter. Chu Yang couldn't help but laugh and said, Elder Bai's words are really interesting. However, being injured and screaming is a natural reaction as a living being. It's impossible that it doesn't exist. It's just that it's rare for us to fight so selflessly. A highly concentrated battle consciousness automatically ignores the basic senses of the human body. Everyone laughed hoarsely. Along the way, they had been trembling in fear and despair at the beginning. Those negative feelings were slowly disappearing bit by bit. By now, everyone was already indifferent to life and death. Chu Yang used all his intelligence and thought of countless ways to get rid of the pursuers. Escaping from death again and again slowly trained these people's nerves to be incomparably tough. From the grief of seeing their comrades die at the beginning, to the numbness and indifference now. Occasionally, they would even make a few jokes. This wasn't heartless, but really indifferent. Maybe next time, I'll be lying there like them. It seemed like there was really nothing to be sad about. Chu Yang was also calculating his own strength. Now, he was left with the last 30 people. Every time he encountered a battle, he would lose a few people. It's just that the recent few times, the number of casualties had decreased. It seemed that the pursuers were gradually getting tired. And the pursuers didn't have a heaven-defying treasure like his incomplete version of heavy pills. However, Chu Yang's incomplete version of the heavy pill was only left with one last pill. If he still needed to use it, then he could only use the super heavy pills. If all these things were used up, he wouldn't have any left. At that time, even if he was injured, he could only wait for death. Villa Master Chu. Chu Yang was deep in thought. Suddenly, he heard Bai Yu Chen call out. Chu Yang turned his head. I want to say a few words. Bai Yu Chen smiled, then his face became serious. This is also what we all want to say. We've been through life and death together for so long. At this moment, I really feel uncomfortable if I don't say it. Chu Yang sat up straight. He said seriously, please speak. These days, we've all seen it. Villa Master Chu. You're really a person who can do great things. Bai Yu Chen said, every time we fought, you were always at the forefront. Every strategy and plan came from your hands. If it weren't for Villa Master Chu, we would have been annihilated more than once by Mo Yuntian's huge army. We might have been annihilated the first time or even the second time. However, it is precisely Villa Master Chu that has brought us step by step, and forcibly withstood it all. Chu Yang's eyes flashed like lightning. Since you want to be loyal to me, then from now on, this is my first order. Manor Lord, please instruct us. Everyone stood up straight. Don't use the word death lightly at any time. Chu Yang took a deep breath. You must know. At the very least, when you said the word die, you were still alive. If you're not, then die. Yes. Villa Master's teachings, everyone agreed in a low voice. Death, however, was only a single word. But if it was said from the mouth for a long time, then when encountering a major calamity, they would naturally give up resistance from the bottom of their hearts. Even if your hands were still fighting, if your heart had no hope, how could you still live on? This was a psychological problem. Actually, there were quite a number of people who sacrificed previously. They might not have no strength to fight again. But they would rather choose a quick death. It was because their hopes were no longer on themselves, and they were all entrusted to others. This way, they also lost the motivation to work hard to live on, intentionally or unintentionally. As for more systematic things, Chu Yang did not know either. But he knew one thing: as long as you still wanted to live on, and had a very strong desire to live on, then there would definitely be a way to survive. Heavens! There was no dead end. Another few days passed. The rain still did not stop. Furthermore, there was still a trend of getting heavier and heavier. Chu Yang and the rest were already exhausted to the peak. It was another 7 to 8 battles in a row. But these few battles, there actually did not appear to be casualties. This was simply somewhat inconceivable in the eyes of Bai Yu Chen and the rest. We are made of flesh and blood, and so are the enemies. Chu Yang revealed the essence of the matter with one sentence. We are tired, but they are even more tired. Because the work they have to do is far more than what we have to do. And we only need to run as we wish. As long as it is not within their expectations, we can fly freely in the sky. Another point is also very important. We are running for our own lives, but they are chasing us to complete the mission given to them by others. This is the fundamental difference. If this situation continues, as long as we don't die and continue to run, then we can even drag these 10,000 people to death, and tire them to death. Perhaps, we can even kill a saint-level expert in the end. Chu Yang laughed. Everyone also relaxed and laughed. Their laughter was actually quite pleasant. Everyone knew that dragging and exhausting the enemy to death was absolutely impossible. As for killing a saint-level expert, that was even more nonsense. But there was no doubt that Chu Yang's words were very satisfying. Everyone felt a heartfelt sense of comfort in their hearts. It was as if they had already seen those ink cloud guards being dragged and exhausted to death, and even that old fellow Meng Wuya dying. In everyone's imagination, although Meng Wuya, who had been reduced to a state of death, would not really die, he was really suffering during this period of time. He really had a taste of what it meant to be badly battered. Since the encounter in the forest, it was not only the beginning of a nightmare for Chu Yang and the rest, it was also the beginning of a nightmare for Meng Wuya. After that battle, it began to rain. Then, everything entered an unknown state. Originally, they thought that as long as they locked onto Chu Yang and the rest and caught up to them, then Chu Yang and the rest would not be able to escape. At least in the hearts of the people of Ink Cloud Sky, whether it was the Ink Cloud Guards, the Silver Armored Guards, or even Meng Wuya himself, they all thought so. 10,000 people against 100 people, and everyone's cultivation was about the same. The other side even had a saint-level expert like Meng Wuya holding the line. If there were still any accidents, then they might as well bang their head and die. However, the outcome of the matter proved that Meng Wuya was the one who should bang his head and die. They used all the means that they could use, encircling, intercepting, ambushing, and so on. However, Chu Yang was always able to find the weakest link and break out of the encirclement. Then, the cycle repeated again and again, spiraling back and forth. Every time, there would be casualties on Chu Yang's side, but the problem was that there would also be casualties on Meng Wuya's side. After dozens of consecutive battles, the Ink Cloud Sky soldiers that had a total of 10,000 people had now been reduced to less than 5,000 people. More than 3,500 experts had disappeared just like that. The casualties were actually more than 10 times that of the other side. And that damned culprit Chu Yang, how he should escape was still how he should escape. Clearly, they had already felt that this group of people had collapsed to the extreme in the previous moment, but the next moment, they were still able to charge over energetically. Originally, they thought that even if they had to endure, they would be able to make these people collapse. But now, it seemed that the final result was very likely that everyone would collapse together. It was also possible that the people on their side would collapse first before the other side did. The only impossible thing was that before their side collapsed, the other side would collapse first. Why was it impossible? They really did not know what kind of evil method that Chu Yang had used. Although that group of people died less and less, each one of them was actually becoming more and more difficult to deal with. Chapter 1975. Among the people around Chu Yang, almost half of them were at the celestial being level. This is from P. But at this moment, everyone was a little shocked by this situation. When they broke through to the celestial being level, there wasn't such a big movement. Wasn't this movement a little too big? But the next moment, Chu Yang let out a long cry and shouted, Meng Wuya! Boom! When he shouted this, the dantian in his body suddenly swelled and exploded at the same time. All the spiritual energy instantly gathered into a ball, rumbling and rotating in his body. The clouds in the sky seemed to be undergoing some special changes. However, no one noticed the subtle change. How could there be no clouds in the pouring rain? Above the cumulonimbus clouds, countless dark clouds rushed over at lightning speed. In the blink of an eye, they formed a thick cloud with a strong destructive aura. Heavenly punishment. That's right. It was heavenly punishment. The dark clouds in the sky continued to gather, forming a huge eye in the sky. But this eye was formed above the cumulonimbus clouds. The awe-inspiring power of heaven and earth was contained but not released, so no one noticed it except for the person involved, Chu Yang. Heavenly punishment didn't exist at all in Chu Yang's previous breakthroughs. That was because his tribulation space carried the power of someone who surpassed heavenly punishment. Unless the level of heavenly punishment exceeded the creator of the tribulation space, it would never be able to affect him. But now, the tribulation space couldn't be opened and was closed in disguise. Chu Yang's breakthrough this time inevitably attracted heavenly punishment. For ordinary people, there was only one heavenly punishment when they broke through. The eye of heaven, thunder and lightning flash. Those who went against heaven must be punished by heavenly punishment. But Chu Yang's breakthrough attracted heavenly punishment at once. This naturally had a lot to do with his dantian. Chu Yang was the first to realize that his breakthrough had attracted the heavenly punishment. Moreover, he had attracted so many of them in one go. But at this moment, instead of being shocked, he was happy. He wanted to fight desperately after the breakthrough, but now it seemed that there was another way to go. If he encountered heavenly punishment on the road to death, would it be a positive? Once I rush over, immediately break out of the encirclement. Go as far as you can. Don't worry about me, do you hear me? Chu Yang said in a deep voice. Mana Lord. Everyone turned pale with fright. If you still regard me as the Mana Lord, then I'll be the Mana Lord. Listen to my orders, Chu Yang said. Leave behind the secret signal that we've arranged beforehand. If I can escape, I'll naturally look for you at the first moment. Don't come to the place where I'm at. I already have a plan to escape. Do you understand what I'm saying? Yes. Chu Yang laughed heartily. Suddenly, he leaped out and stood on top of the tree. He shouted, "Who wants to kill me? Who dares to kill me? Who can kill me?" His laughter was a kind of arrogant attitude that showed disdain for the world. All of a sudden, it exploded. Bai Yu Chen and the others looked at Chu Yang with great reverence, and then quietly retreated. Chu Yang had already attracted everyone's attention. Everyone was gathering around him. At this moment, under the cover of Chu Yang's powerful breakthrough, the torrential rain and the escape of Bai Yu Chen and the others did not attract anyone's attention. This was because everyone's attention was already focused on Chu Yang. Chu Yang. He was the ultimate culprit. He was also everyone's primary goal in coming to the Eastern Royal Heavens this time. Heads surged like waves, rolling in from all directions. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Countless people leaped onto the treetops and faced Chu Yang. Although they did not know why Chu Yang was the only one left here and did not know where the others had gone. But as long as they caught Chu Yang, they would have completed their mission. As for the others, without Chu Yang leading them, they would definitely not be able to do anything. It was only a matter of time before they were all killed. Even if all of them escaped, it would not matter. The most difficult one to deal with was still Chu Yang alone. Chu Yang faced the huge army with his hands behind his back. There was a faint smile on his face as he stood in the wind. Although Chu Yang was alone at this moment, his demeanor at this moment made everyone admire him, regardless of whether they were enemies or allies. His clothes were already in tatters. Rather than saying that he was wearing them, it was more accurate to say that they were hanging on his body. He was covered in mud and blood and looked extremely pathetic. But when he stood on top of the tree with his hands behind his back, he looked like an emperor who controlled the world and was patrolling his territory. He had no regard for anything and everything. There was an indescribable domineering power and an indescribable ease. There was an indescribable sense of transcendence. Meng Wu Ye stepped out of the crowd and looked at Chu Yang. This was the second time they met after such a short period of time. Finally, this young genius had miscalculated. He had finally trapped him here, leaving him with no way out. The legend had been written. Was today the end of the chapter? Chu Yang, this is the second time we have met. It seems that this matter should be over. Meng Wu Ye let out a long sigh. I'm very sorry, and I'm also very sorry. You're such a peerless genius. If you were given another 100 years, I'm sure it would be difficult to find anyone who could contend with you. The meaning behind the heartfelt praise was tantamount to announcing the end of Chu Yang's life today. Without a future, what was the meaning of a high evaluation? Chu Yang smiled faintly and said, "It should be over." Is that true? I don't think so. Especially after hearing your praise for me, my will to live has become even stronger. Meng Wu Ye smiled. You won't have the chance. In such a situation, you can only face my 1,000-strong army alone. Almost every one of their cultivation is not weaker than yours. Could it be that you still have the power to turn the situation around? Do you think that you are that undying divine soul? Chu Yang, don't put up any unnecessary resistance. To be honest, we don't want to make things difficult for you, and we don't want to kill you either. As long as you're willing to surrender, we can give you the best treatment on the way back to Moyun Sky. We'll let your last journey in life be more relaxed and happy. Meng Wu Ya said sincerely, I believe that you can trust me on this point. I really don't doubt this. But, what about after I reach Moyun's sky? What will the result be? Chu Yang smiled faintly and said, everything still has to end, right? At this point, everyone was speechless. Could it be that you still have delusions of having a way out after seeing the Lord Heavenly Emperor? The fact that we didn't make things difficult for you on the way back is already a huge risk. And this is still on the account that you are a real man, giving you an exceptional treatment. Otherwise, just for the sake of countless comrades dying in your hands, you won't be able to have an easy journey. It will definitely make your life worse than death. You actually still have delusions of wanting more. You really don't know what's good for you, and you really don't know what's good for you. The wind whistled. Everyone realized that the wind between heaven and earth. It seemed to have become bigger in an instant. The wind suddenly grew stronger, and the entire mountain forest creaked. It was the sound of countless large trees being blown to the side by the sudden increase in the wind, and they were on the verge of snapping. However, no matter how strong the wind was. The trees on which everyone was standing were still motionless. Other than the sudden increase in the wind, the rain in the sky also became thicker and thicker. There were also clouds. The clouds in the sky also seemed to be getting lower and lower. Thank you for your kindness, General. I will not surrender without a fight. Chu Yang smiled and said softly. His voice was low and hoarse, but it was filled with awe. He slowly raised his head. The cold determination in his eyes was the opposite of the indifference in his tone. Meng Wu Ya couldn't help but be startled, and his expression became serious. Then, Chu Yang's voice suddenly grew louder. Only the Chu Yang who died in battle. The Chu Yang who will never give up. In the cold voice, Chu Yang's body was like an arrow leaving the bow. He left the top of the tree and swooped down, bringing with him a stream of light. He rushed into the crowd. After he left, the big tree under him was broken by the strong wind with a catcher sound. The magnificent sword energy of the Calamity sword surged out. The two enemies who were directly in front of him screamed miserably as they were split into 4 parts. He made his move. Facing more than 1,000 enemies in front of him, Chu Yang still chose to take the initiative to attack. 1 sword against 1,000. In such a desperate situation, he was like a lone hero who would never admit defeat, standing up and fighting fearlessly. However, 1 sword against 1,000 was a choice, but 1 sword against 1,000 was the result he hoped for. This result was too difficult to achieve. Chu Yang's voice grew louder and louder. From loud, to roaring, to roaring. I will never admit defeat. Chu Yang laughed wildly, and his body flashed like a ghost. The few ink cloud guards closest to him almost didn't have time to react, and there was already a lot of blood spurting out of their bodies. In this world, I have never submitted to anyone. Not in the past, not now, and not in the future. Chu Yang took 3 steps forward, and his hand sword slashed 3 times consecutively. What harm was there in slaughtering the world? More than a dozen figures tumbled and spun out. If you want to catch me, show me your ability. If you want to kill me, pay the price. Even if I can't beat you, you still have to spit out 3 mouthfuls of blood for me. I am Chu Yang. I was once a minister, and also known as the King of Hell. Starting from the grassroots, competing in the smoke of war, every step was difficult, every step was life and death. I was at the end of the road more than once. I died and lived, but I still strengthened myself. From nothing to now facing a Sky Emperor, even if I can't beat him, I am still Chu Yang. Still fighting the world. Sword test again. Meng Wu Ya, let's see how many lives you can take out to be buried with me. Chu Yang roared loudly. The long sword in his hand suddenly burst out with thousands of cold rays. The real, complete, first sword of the Calamity sword technique. Under such extreme pressure, in such an extremely disadvantageous situation, Chu Yang successfully executed half a move. Although it was only half a move, countless screams and wails could be heard. Chapter 1976. Although Chu Yang had yet to pass the heavenly punishment, he already had the strength of a heaven-level expert. Moreover, This strength was at least twice as strong as a peak Deva level expert. With such strength, and the support of the world's #1 divine weapon, the Calamity Sword, as well as a supreme sword technique like the Calamity Sword technique, it was easy to destroy opponents of the same level. Just now, by chance, the final move of the Calamity Sword technique had a great effect. Not only did it exceed Deva Mo Yun's imagination, it even exceeded Chu Yang's own expectations. The power of one sword had actually killed more than 50 enemies. The power of one move was actually so great. Meng Wu Ya watched as Chu Yang dashed left and right in front of his army. It was as if he had entered a no-man's land. No one was his match. Especially the power of his last sword move. It was frightening. It was shocking. Meng Wu Ya sighed. Then, it became dignified. Then, it became respectful. Such an enemy was worthy of anyone's respect. And the greatest respect for such an enemy was to use all one's strength to kill him. Meng Wuya said in a deep voice, "Kill him with all your might." The strength that Chu Yang had displayed so far had greatly exceeded Meng Wuya's expectations. It was not weaker than a peak Deva level expert. In other words, the power of Chu Yang's sword had reached the level of a half-step saint. If possible, Meng Wuya would rather do it himself, but with his current injuries, he was powerless to do so. He could only use the human wave tactic to encircle and annihilate Chu Yang. With a command, everyone moved at the same time. There were more than 300 people in this wave. Countless saber light and sword energy flew toward Chu Yang in a crisscrossing manner. "Come on." Chu Yang laughed wildly. The Calamity Sword rumbled and the sword roared like a dragon. Hundreds of majestic sword energy flew like dragons in the sky. Every one of them collided head-on. At this moment, the huge amount of spiritual energy that had gathered in his body and had nowhere to vent was completely released in this sword. Boom! With a deafening bang, the sword chi on the battlefield intertwined and turned into a ball of blazing white light. Everyone present couldn't see anything and felt a stinging pain in their eyes. In great shock, they all turned around and retreated one after another. Chu Yang is facing hundreds of experts by himself. But he is still able to fight to such an extent. It was truly shocking. Without exception, a small chip appeared on the weapons of everyone who participated in the battle. Wow! Chu Yang's body suffered a severe backlash from the thousands of sword energies. He spouted out a mouthful of blood with a wah sound. Then, he flew high up in the sky like a kite with its string cut. He somersaulted dozens of times, and soared high into the sky. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the rolling figure. Everyone's eyes were filled with pity. This included the ink cloud guards who had never considered anything else. Everyone knew that even if Chu Yang didn't die after this attack, he wouldn't have the slightest power to fight back. The path of this hero who never gave up had come to an end. Once his body landed, it would be time to capture him in one fell swoop. This should be Chu Yang's final madness. However, Chu Yang's body continued to roll until he reached a big tree. Then, he suddenly straightened his waist, and ferociously kicked the tree trunk with his feet. Crack! A tree that was over 1,000 feet tall, so big that it would take dozens of people to wrap their arms around it, was snapped off from the tree. The top half of the tree crown flew out like a huge umbrella. It was as if it was floating in the air, and flew out hundreds of feet. Chu Yang's body left the treetops with a loud roar, and soared into the sky. He slowly flew toward the clouds in the sky. Roar! Chu Yang roared toward the sky, and his whole body's aura exploded. Hissing and roaring sounds were mixed with a mouthful of blood spurting out. A ferocious burst of energy and an intense aura of a breakthrough instantly filled the heavens. Breakthrough? He actually broke through? Meng Wu Ya's face suddenly changed. As a profound cultivator, he was really confused at this moment. How could this be? How did Chu Yang suddenly make a breakthrough after that world-destroying blow? What was going on? Chu Yang already had such strength now. After breaking through, wouldn't it mean that he would at least have the strength of a saint? However, Meng Wu Ya had overestimated Chu Yang. In fact, Chu Yang's strength had increased greatly due to his breakthrough. And this process could be described as a sudden increase in strength. He had used his strength to defeat the enemy, and then received the heavenly punishment. It wasn't as exaggerated as Meng Wu Ye had imagined. However, the heavenly punishment caused by the breakthrough would definitely come. In the next moment, the whole sky suddenly darkened, as if the clouds in the sky suddenly pressed down. Meng Wu Ye's pupils shrank, and he looked at the sky with some fear. The clouds in the sky suddenly parted, and actually separated into clusters of clouds. The streaks of lightning were like dense clouds that had been nurtured for generations. They gathered in one place, but they were clearly separated. They rotated slowly, and almost instantly, they formed a deep vortex. It was like a huge eye, hanging in the sky. What? Heavenly punishment? How can there be such a strange heavenly punishment? Meng Wu Ye's eyes almost popped out. If not for his eyes, there was a high chance that they would have shot out. A deep sense of powerlessness instantly enveloped Meng Wu Ye. This time, he was really screwed over by Chu Yang. All of Meng Wu Ye's grief and indignation at this moment came down to these 3 words. Looking over there were still many people leaping into the sky to chase after Chu Yang. However, such an action was no different from resisting and provoking the heavenly punishment. The heavenly punishment never cared about who it was facing. If it was just one person facing heaven's punishment, then the pressure he would have to bear would be great, but it would not reach a terrifying level. Under heaven's punishment, the danger is great, but most of the time, it would leave a chance for the person to survive. As long as you grasp it, then you will pass. But if you don't, then sorry. But this chance of survival had a prerequisite, and that was to not provoke the heavenly punishment. Once you did, not only would you lose your chance of survival, you would also have to bear the most terrifying counterattack. For example, because of the entanglement with Chu Yang, all of Mo Yunqian's people were here, and under the influence of the heavenly punishment, everyone was standing on the opposite side of the heavenly punishment. In other words, these people had all become the enemies of the heavenly punishment, targets to be eliminated. Under such circumstances, the heavenly punishment did not differentiate between friend and foe, and only knew how to attack together. This was not the main point. The heavenly punishment would not only attack everyone together, but the power of the heavenly punishment would also rise to an even more terrifying level. In terms of strength, this level of strength was enough to kill everyone facing it, and this level of strength was definitely not something that a person could bear. It was almost beyond the limits of what a human could resist. Even if one wanted to escape now, it would be useless. Escaping would only cause one to die faster. Under the heavenly punishment, how could it allow anyone to escape? Chu Yang. Are you crazy? Meng Wu Ye cried out miserably. He clearly understood the situation in front of him, but he was already powerless. He was unable to change this situation that was already destined to die. Crazy. Meng Wu Ye concluded that Chu Yang was crazy, because, although this heavenly punishment would cause a large number of casualties in Mo Yunqian, the power of the heavenly punishment now had already surpassed Chu Yang's heavenly punishment by countless times. Chu Yang still had the heart of the heavenly punishment, and he would definitely not be spared. Chu Yang's body floated in the air, and he laughed loudly as he floated under the heavenly punishment. Since we must die, then let everyone accompany me on the road. This is a very profitable transaction. Those at the outermost area, leave immediately. Leave this place at full speed. Meng Wu Ye shouted with all his might. Those at the innermost area were already destined to face the heavenly punishment because of the influence of the heavenly punishment. They definitely could not escape. But those at the outermost area might still have a chance. It was just a possibility. Meng Wu Ye almost vomited blood as he yelled. More than 2,000 ink cloud guards and silver-armored soldiers at the outermost area heard him and dispersed. They were also high-level cultivators. How could they not understand the danger? Naturally, they retreated at full speed. However, countless green lightning bolts shot out from the sky. Even among those who escaped at the outermost area, there were hundreds of people who were identified by the heavenly punishment. The only thing these people could do was to come back and live and die with Chu Yang. Because if they ran again, they would only further implicate their companions. A total of more than 4,000 people, including Meng Wu Ya, were all wrapped up by Chu Yang and pulled onto the last bus to death. No one could leave, and no one could escape. If this last bus was destined to be destroyed, then everyone would go on the road together. If this was a boat that had already started to fill with water and was destined to sink, then everyone was now on the boat, waiting for the time to sink together. Quietly waiting to be overturned. The single eye in the sky rotated together, and then, countless different colored lightning bolts came crashing down. Boom boom boom. The whole world started to tremble. The heavenly punishment that Chu Yang triggered was originally different from the rest. Now that it was catalyzed by Mo Yuntian and the rest, it had really reached an unprecedented level. I believe that it was not much different from the heavenly punishment of a true saint. If I can describe it, I would like to describe it like this: tens of thousands of atomic bombs, smashing towards the same place wave after wave. A lightning bolt struck towards Chu Yang. Chu Yang let out a long roar and danced excitedly. He turned into a streak of light and dodged at an extremely fast speed. Moreover, he specially dodged towards a place where there were many people. He laughed loudly. Fighting in the land of heavenly punishment is also very enjoyable. I believe that in all your lives, you have never experienced such a wonderful thing, right? Ha 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 ha. Come, let us have some fun together. Fuck you. More than 4,000 people cursed in their hearts. You damned bastard. You're really unlucky to have met him this time. Even in their dreams, they did not expect to meet the heavenly punishment head-on just to complete a mission to capture a person, and with such a huge commotion. This was simply an undeserved calamity. In this generation, who would have the chance to meet the heavenly punishment head-on before they had a breakthrough? Right now, I'm doing something that has never been done before and will never be done again. Chapter 1977. As for the heavenly punishment battle that Chu Yang mentioned, everyone was even more speechless. They just took it as Chu Yang farting, and it was the kind that was tasteless and didn't even have a stench. Learn it, WB. Any now, at every moment, there were tens of thousands of lightning tribulations falling from the sky. Everyone couldn't wait to dodge. Who still had the time to fight with you? Besides, fighting with you was equivalent to indirectly facing the most violent lightning tribulations. No one wanted to die so early. An ink cloud guard couldn't dodge in time and was struck by the tribulation thunder of heaven's punishment. With his cultivation, he would definitely be injured, but it wouldn't be fatal. However, after being struck by the tribulation thunder, he couldn't help but be slightly delayed for a moment. Then, countless tribulation thunder struck his body at the same time. In the blink of an eye, his entire body turned into black ashes that filled the sky. If there was a first, there would be a second, a third. As the lightning tribulations of the heavenly punishment intensified, such things would definitely become more frequent. Therefore, one by one, the ink cloud guards and silver-armored soldiers died under the lightning tribulations of the heavenly punishment. But if one were to say that Chu Yang didn't live up to his reputation of fighting under the heavenly punishment, then Chu Yang was really wronged. Chu Yang didn't intend to dodge at all, he only knew how to attack. Like a gust of wind, he flitted past everyone without stopping. No matter who it was, he would slash at them with his sword. Then, he would leave without caring about the result. Once the opponent was disturbed by Chu Yang's attack, how could they have time to dodge the lightning tribulations? They just had to take the lightning tribulations. As long as they were hit by the first one, they would be paralyzed for a moment. During this short period of paralysis, countless lightning tribulations would strike their bodies. The lightning in the sky seemed to have gone crazy, taking lives at an extremely fast speed. The lightning tribulations in the sky continued to fall endlessly, as if there would never be a moment of rest. At the beginning, the lightning tribulations were only as thick as a wrist. Then, they gradually increased to the thickness of a human head, waist, water tank, and finally as thick as a house. With a blue color, purple light flashed as they fell. Every lightning bolt could directly split a mountain into pieces. This was definitely not a metaphor. There was once a tall mountain that was coincidentally struck by a bolt of lightning and turned into a lake. The vicissitudes of life happened right in front of everyone's eyes. Everyone fled in all directions. However, Tianfa also dispersed and chased after them, but its power was not reduced in the slightest. Meng Wu Ya couldn't help but cry as he looked at the scene before him. Suddenly, a strong hatred for Chu Yang rose in his heart. Even if you're my enemy, this move of yours is too ruthless. Too ruthless. Meng Wuya had reached the level of a saint. He had already gone through the heavenly punishment, which was at the peak of the heavenly human stage. Therefore, his current situation was that as long as Meng Wu Ya did not move, the heavenly punishment would not look for him and would not level up. In the beginning, Meng Tian Ya had misjudged the level of Chu Yang's heavenly punishment, and had even set up all kinds of defensive measures. But, when the heavenly punishment descended, he unexpectedly discovered that the heavenly punishment didn't target him at all. Only then did he realize that Chu Yang's heavenly punishment was a heavenly punishment. As long as he didn't act recklessly, he wouldn't be implicated. Therefore, Meng Wu Ya didn't dare to act recklessly. At most, he would give a warning. Once he moved, the heavenly punishment would look for people who provoked him. That would be an act of courting death. However, in the current situation, Meng Wu Ya still didn't move. The torture for him was even greater. He could only watch helplessly as his subordinates who had followed him for many years died miserably one by one. He could only watch helplessly as Chu Yang came and went. He kept causing trouble, but he couldn't move at all. To be more precise, he didn't dare to move. What kind of feeling was this exactly? This kind of feeling was worse than death for Meng Wu Ya. But he really couldn't move. He didn't dare to move. If he didn't move, the heavenly punishment wouldn't level up. Then, there would still be a chance for someone to survive. But, if he moved, the heavenly punishment that descended again would be at the level of a saint. That would truly be the case where no one would survive. Meng Wu Ya's hands and feet trembled. He looked at Chu Yang laughing wildly as he shuttled back and forth in the pouring rain. And his subordinates were constantly being destroyed by the heavenly punishment. 2 streams of tears flowed down his face. During this time, it wasn't that there weren't any heavenly tribulation lightning that fell on Chu Yang's body. In fact, Chu Yang's heavenly tribulation lightning had already struck more than 100 times. But, Chu Yang only frowned slightly. He didn't stop at all. He continued to run and dodge, even though his body was constantly emitting smoke. That was because his muscles had been penetrated by the lightning. Some of his muscles were even necrotic. They were already burning like dry firewood. But, Chu Yang didn't care about this at all. He was still moving unhindered. He was still heroic. As he watched, the only thing Meng Wu Ya could do was to look up to the sky and sigh. He muttered, if Chu Yang doesn't die in the end, there's no need to wait 100 years. At most 10 years, Mo Yuntian will be in big trouble. Such an opponent is definitely anyone's nightmare. Once he's given time to grow, even if he's the first emperor's empress. Speaking until here, he was horrified. He actually didn't dare to think about it anymore. If he continued to think about it, he was afraid that it would also shatter what little confidence he had left. Heavenly Emperor Mo Yun undoubtedly sowed an unresolvable enmity with Chu Yang this time. Yuan Tianji definitely wouldn't give up on killing Chu Yang. And the result of every pursuit would only make the hatred in Chu Yang's heart stronger. If Chu Yang didn't die in the repeated pursuit, then, these layers of pursuit would also turn around and destroy Chu Yang. A true powerhouse could only be tempered through countless life and death situations. But, even Meng Wu Ya himself had seen countless of Chu Yang's life and death battles. Adding up all the life and death crises that a powerhouse had encountered in their tens of thousands of years of life, perhaps, couldn't even compare to Chu Yang's experience in this half a month. And this kind of experience would still continue. There were only 2 results. First, capture Chu Yang and kill him. Second, Chu Yang gradually grew. In the end, he would grow to the point where even Heavenly Emperor Mo Yun wouldn't dare to deal with him easily. What kind of existence was that kind of existence? Without a doubt, it was the level of Emperor 1. Or perhaps, even higher. But Chu Yang was still so weak right now, and he had already stirred up a storm in the world. And he would never admit defeat, a personality that would never yield. Once it really reached that point, would Chu Yang choose to swallow his anger and live peacefully? Absolutely impossible. Meng Wu Ya was so frightened by his own imagination that his hair stood on end. Because now, he could already foresee that if Chu Yang could survive in this land of heavenly punishment, he might already be powerless against him. Heavenly punishment rumbled. More than 1,000 heavenly Emperor Mo Yun experts had already perished here. The remaining ones were also hanging on bitterly. Being annihilated was only a matter of time. Chu Yang suddenly let out a long and loud cry. He brazenly flew up, and passed through the dense lightning bolts. The tribulation sword gave off a dazzling light. With a swoosh, it brought Chu Yang's body and disappeared in front of everyone. Immediately, heavenly punishment lightning followed. The lightning here was still continuing. Meng Wu Ya turned pale with fright. But he still couldn't move. He didn't dare to move. He could only grab the stones on the ground anxiously, his eyes wide open. Chu Yang was heading in the direction of the 3 flying boats. In the eyes of the guards on the flying boats, Chu Yang was like an indomitable, peerless demon god, flying over with endless wind and thunder. This was definitely not a description. It was a fact. It was a reality. Chu Yang himself might be small, but at this moment, he was riding on a sword. The lightning in the sky followed him as he moved. But it was mixed with a terrifying power that was enough to shake the world. It was like a small body, but it had wings that connected heaven and earth. Quick! Start the flying boats and avoid this bastard at full speed. Quick! But everything was too late. The moment they saw Chu Yang with their naked eyes, it was already too late to start the flying boats. Seeing Chu Yang getting closer and closer to them, and the lightning becoming more and more violent, the people on the flying boats jumped down without any backbone and ran away. Damn it! You have already harmed so many people. Don't take care of us too. Chu Yang's body approached the flying boats like lightning. The tribulation sword burst out with brilliant light, and ruthlessly dug a big hole in the sturdy body of the flying boats. Chu Yang rushed in and sneaked into the flying boats like a ghost. Finally, he could take a breath. Chu Yang decisively took out a super heavy pill and swallowed it. Just as he put the heavy pill into his mouth, he didn't even have time to check the furnishings of the flying boats when he felt his body shake violently. At this moment, at least thousands of lightning bolts hit the flying boats. A glaring and extremely blazing white light suddenly flashed. That was the defensive power of the flying boats. The strongest self-defense mechanism was activated. Chu Yang rolled back and forth on the flying boats like a rolling gourd. The second wave of the heavenly punishment tribulation thunder had already fallen, followed by the third wave, the fourth wave. Only by the third wave, the flying boats' defenses were completely destroyed. The next moment, a flying boat exploded with a bang. Under the heavenly punishment tribulation thunder, there was nothing it couldn't destroy. Although the flying boats were made of special materials, they still couldn't resist. Chu Yang pretended to scream, panicking like a stray dog. He was confused like a fish that had escaped the net. His target was the second flying boat. Boom boom boom, and so on. Chu Yang laughed brilliantly and wantonly. He didn't care about the several wounds on his body that were emitting black smoke from the lightning strikes. He rushed all the way back. Behind him, the 3 super flying boats from Mo Yuntian had already turned into 3 huge fireballs at this moment. The burning light almost illuminated half of the eastern royal sky. The 3 flying boats were destroyed by Chu Yang. Meng Wuya's hands and feet were cold. How much manpower and material resources would it take to build 3 super flying boats like this? No one could be clearer than Meng Wuya about this point. But now, it had been completely destroyed by Chu Yang in less than the time it took to drink a cup of tea, to the extent that they were even worse than scrap metal. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.